Well, there's good news tonight. Let me tell you, there's good news. President Trump has listened to thousands and thousands of you out there all across the country who have asked the president to act to temporarily pause the various foreign guest worker programs that have been, frankly, displacing Americans now for decades, particularly the H-1B program, the L program. When the president paused immigration overall, several categories, about 60 days ago, he promised to take additional action. Thanks to some of the fine work, and I want to congratulate the great team, R.J. Hauman, who's here with us today, and his folks at FAIR who work tirelessly 24/7 and help to galvanize support across the country. The president has acted, and he's acted in a meaningful and substantial way. Welcome, R.J.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Dan.
Yeah, listen, this is really a fabulous team effort, but I got to say, you really were working overtime, burning the candle at both ends 24/7, pretty much full time to try to help push this thing over the top. So, tell us basically, what did the president do and what does it mean?
Yeah, just some quick background though first, Dan. I think a lot of people that follow FAIR, both on social media, our website, and watch these as well, know that when President Trump issued an executive order in late April 22nd, he didn't go far enough. He simply limited some categories of immigrant visas coming in, never touched any guest worker program. That wouldn't really address the crisis. And we all know, since February, unemployment has absolutely skyrocketed as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and then the economic response. A lot of businesses closing, millions of Americans out of work in almost every industry. And a lot of these industries have guest worker programs that employers, both corporate employers and people who like cheap foreign labor, they abuse it. So what the president did here, this was so key. Something that has a lot of broad public support as well. So he responded to increased public support and pressure led by us here at FAIR, signed a new executive order on June 22nd, extending his initial one, and went even farther at an additional suspension of several main guest worker programs. H-1B that everybody knows about, the white collar jobs where American workers are replaced. H-2B, a lot of seasonal employers where kids home from college would love to work. And then certain J and L visas, preserving jobs for American workers. This is a huge win. Even better, he's on firm legal footing. We know the Supreme Court did something ridiculous the other week when they said he couldn't end DACA the way he did. But this is via 212F, which allows the president to suspend the entry of any class of aliens. And he did that here. He's on firm legal footing, and he should be applauded for it. The American people are behind him, and hundreds of thousands will benefit.
Now, I think the important point here is that the people who drafted 212F and drafted our immigration law set out procedures for precisely this kind of situation, a massive decline in employment, people being thrown out of work, 35, 40 million Americans. These programs that were set up, particularly these foreign guest worker programs, were set up for one purpose, and then they've devolved into a whole bunch of other special interest, greedy agenda items, and now they're way out of control. The president hopefully will be able to use this opportunity to think about how we can restructure these programs to actually make sure they serve the American people and the American worker. For far too long now, these programs, H-1B and others, have been used to outsource labor, outsource jobs, export technology. It certainly benefited countries like India, but an awful lot of well-trained American tech workers and others are basically, they're applauding this, but they've been kind of left out in the cold. So a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, Dan, and as you're saying, again, it's, President Obama, when he issued DACA, when he did DACA, he was ignoring the rule of law. President Trump is acting in accordance with it. Again, 212F, just how Congress intended. Listen, our immigration system as a whole, and these are the long-term reforms you're talking about, and these guest worker programs should not operate on autopilot. When a situation like this comes around with unemployment rates at historic highs, tens of millions of Americans out of work, we shouldn't be giving employers access to cheap foreign labor who they can underpay. We should encourage them to hire American workers who desperately need these jobs. Again, this is just such a massive win for the American worker, and we're proud that the Trump administration resisted so much pressure from some swamp creatures internal at the White House and at the agency level, and intense pressure by the business lobby. Dan, we were up fighting against the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who spent over $1 billion lobbying the federal government since they came to exist. Nearly $100 million per year. We fought them tooth and nail, both back channel and increasing public support. Dan, we did that poll. First, soon after his initial executive order was issued, a Washington Post poll found that more than 60% of Americans not only supported what he did, but wanted a broader pause. And then obviously with a big election on the horizon, we commissioned a poll via Zogby Analytics that found that voters in 10 battleground states supported these travel and immigration restrictions by margins of about 2-1. So he wasn't only putting forth a good policy prescription, one of many that we desperately need, but it was something that's good politically. This is a huge victory. I mean, there hasn't been many victories, I'd say, in the federal government over the past several years, given congressional inaction and a lot of swamp creatures we have to fight against. But this is so massive. And again, we couldn't have done it without your support and everybody who follows us, again, on all our channels and supports our organization. We were right there on the front lines, and we accomplished something pretty huge.
That's right. And during this period, between now and December, when this expires, we really can't let up because, I mean, I suppose we're all going to assume that on a bipartisan basis, Vice President Biden probably would join in and say, you know, President Trump was right. During this period of time, we need to give the American worker a break, right? So if Joe Biden gets elected president, is this policy going to continue?
Oh, Dan, I do not think so. But again, here's one other thing on this front that they did kind of announce. Again, this is just 212F. It is said to be temporary in nature. But again, regulations that are issued are intended to be permanent, and they're pretty tough to repeal. Ken Cuccinelli and some other people at DHS announced when rolling out this executive order that they are going to be doing some new permanent regulations on protecting American workers in these guest worker programs. On H-1B, and this is huge, Dan, rather than doing the lottery, they're going to make sure the only people down the line, when the pause is up, who get H-1B visas are paid the highest. So again, you can't pay somebody a small amount and have them win the lottery and luck out. Again, they're going to reform these programs over the coming weeks. We'll be weighing in through the regulatory process, the APA, which we must follow on everything, as you remember from last week. But again, we'll be engaged on that front. We'll be educating you guys on how these are big, important steps. But again, keep in mind, this is a temporary positive step. This can be renewed into perpetuity. If the administration analyzes our economic situation in late December, if the unemployment rate's hovering around 9-10% and tens of millions of Americans still out of work, no, these guest worker programs should not be included. And as you kind of said, Dan, when thinking long term, I think we're going to quickly realize, are these programs truly essential for these industries? I don't think so. They should cease to exist. And that's something we're going to keep fighting on in the future. These programs should be slimmed down or not exist, period. We'll keep our eye over the coming weeks how these employers respond. Are they going out there getting American workers, or are they just going to sit there, pout, and whine to the federal government?
Right. Well, I mean, it's a short-term, right now it's a short-term pause, and because people who are already here are exempted, they can still hire people who are foreign students, so it doesn't apply to them. Mm-hmm. It's likely that the tech companies are going to benefit from some of these changes in the short term, and they're also going to be continuing to push hard and lobby to try to get the president, if he does get reelected, to pull back on these things. So, I mean, this has been an agenda item for a long time, getting these programs back to their original purposes. The purpose of the L visa was originally for intra-company transferees. It's been manipulated 6 ways to Sunday by companies that actually transfer cheap labor. And H-1B, short-term, unforeseeable, emergent, skilled labor has turned into a gravy train, siphoning off foreign students and essentially displacing or not even giving a chance to American minorities to come into these tech fields. Mm-hmm. It's been a real fiasco. People who truly care about wage equity and the American people getting a chance should be applauding what the president has done here. It's good, morally good. It's ethically correct. It's what's needed to be done in this environment. If not under these conditions, when would it be appropriate? So we're all behind it. And there will be, of course, litigation, legal challenges from Amazon, Google. They'll be out there doing all this, Facebook. And we're going to be out there helping, and through our Immigration Reform Law Institute, defending in court what the president has done here. So anything else you want to add, RJ, before we wrap it up?
Yeah, Dan, just a couple of things right there. One of the main things we were worried about when we were, advocating to the administration on why they should do this and what should it include. Keep in mind, FAIR is one of the groups that is behind. I actually believe we were completely behind this. How we responded after the initial executive order. Dan wrote a letter to President Trump several days after saying, hey, this isn't enough. This doesn't protect the American workers. Here's what we need to do. And that's what was done. But one big concern we had are potential loopholes or broadly written exceptions. Now, there is one thing in there, and then we're going to have our eye on this. It's an economic national interest exception. So on a case-by-case basis, the relevant agencies, DHS, Department of State, and Department of Labor, will analyze individual requests if somebody can come in kind of under a guest worker program, if you will, can travel into this country. But they have assured us that they are developing strict criteria on these people entering the country, and will do it on a case-by-case basis, not rubber stamping people coming here. They said, for an example, if you have a steel company from India, one's JSW Steel, for example, they have plants, I believe, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and other things like that. If an immigrant is going to come here and work, they have to support U.S. jobs. So it could be a technical person that's involved in manufacturing and overseeing something on a line that supports 1,000 American workers doing that. They can come. So we'll be engaged over the coming weeks as this executive order is implemented to make sure none of this can be abused. Because after taking a big L, a huge loss, the corporate interests and the business lobby are going to hit the ground running over the coming weeks at the agency level, trying to poke holes in this thing, and we're going to stop that from happening.
Well, I think what we ought to do is, Tom Donahue's been running the Chamber of Commerce for about 50 years. Maybe we ought to call on him to step aside for a foreign worker if he thinks that they're so darn important.
I think that would be a smart play.
All right, we'll be keeping an eye on this, and thanks to everybody who worked so hard on this. This is an example of where FAIR's activism and our expertise work to combine to make truly effective policy change. We're going to be keeping an eye on this because it's going to be huge. If we can build on this for the future and get these programs once again working for the American people, that's what it's all about. We are at fairus.org. That's FAIRUS.org. Love to have you join us. If you're just hearing about us now, I'm Dan Stein. This is RJ Hauman, and we'll be back with you again. Thanks.